Hey guys, we're here in Morpeth for a bit of virtual fieldwork. If you were one of our students at Maitland, you would have come here for a field day.
And loved it.
And obviously. But for other students, this is a really great town because it shows a lot of our urban dynamics at work. It's also really great for the stage 5 course, Changing Places.
Yeah, that very important dot point, urban dynamics and change operating in a small country town or suburb. This is a perfect example of a case study to do that dot point for.
So what we're going to see here in Morpeth is this stretch of street, Swan Street. It's a couple hundred metres. It used to be a hub for export in New South Wales. It then fell into this period of really awful decay where businesses and people just left. And since then, it's now been renewed.
Yeah. So we can essentially see a bunch of different urban dynamics all operating together. We've got decline, renewal, we've got a bit of urban consolidation, and also kind of an urban village at the same time.
We're standing right in front of Campbell's store, which was the starting point for the urban renewal phase that we'll talk about later on. And behind us, you can see Swan Street, which is now dominated by tourism, craft stores, antiques, all things I love.
And sandstone, which is fantastic as well. So we really get a unique culture of place for the whole town of Morpeth. Like any good geographical investigation, we start off with our location. So we're in the town of Morpeth. Morpeth is located on the southern bank of the Hunter River. We are 170 kilometres north of Sydney and about 40 kilometres northwest of the main part of Newcastle.
When we analyse how Morpeth has changed over time, we break it into 3 distinct phases. Firstly, we look at urban growth, where businesses and people moved into Morpeth because of the trade industry. We then look at a period of urban decay, where businesses and people move out of Morpeth as the trade industry breaks down in Morpeth. And then we look at urban renewal, which is happening today, where we see a significant change in the industry that operates here on Swan Street. To kick us off, we're going to go head down to Queen's Wharf and have a look at what caused urban growth in Morpeth in the first place.
All right, let's go have a look.
Guys, we're down here at Queen's Wharf to look at the first stage of Morpeth's development, which was a period of really significant urban growth.
So from about 1840 to 1940, but particularly around the 1860s, Morpeth was the second largest and second most important city, or town if you like, in all of New South Wales. It
What's
was
that?
Sydney and then Morpeth, not Newcastle, weirdly. The reason for that are many and complex, but largely have to do with what's behind us right here. This is Queen's Wharf, as Sammy just said, and this was essentially a main transport hub for farmed goods in northern New South Wales.
So what that means is all across regional New South Wales, people would load their produce, hay, wheat, all kinds of things like that onto what we call bullock trains. I'm going to insert a picture here. I like to think that they're like Santa's sleigh but with cows, and they would bring it here to Morpeth, and from Morpeth they would send it off to Newcastle to be exported. Why Morpeth?
Well, for a couple of reasons, but the first one is that the main type of transportation that wasn't a bullock train was paddle steamers. There were no cars, there were no trains. This is way before any of that. So if you wanted to carry a large amount of goods, you had to load it on a paddle steamer, because paddle steamers could go both in the ocean and in rivers, and paddle it down to where all the people were, which is in Sydney.
Here's a paddle steamer, by the way.
That was a great paddle steamer. That was
beautiful paddle
very
steamer.
impressive.
Why don't we use those anymore?
I don't know, it's slow. So, the reason for Morpeth's existence is geographical in a way. This is the furthest up the Hunter River that a paddle steamer could get. Therefore, the shortest distance to bullock train stuff to be able to load it onto a boat and take it to Sydney.
The use of these bullock trains has a really significant impact on the morphology of the town.
Morphology, that's a great word.
We love those key words in geography. When we get up to the main street, I'm going to show you how the roads we still use in Morpeth were designed specifically to accommodate this kind of trade.
Bullock train. Yeah.
Bullock? Bullock. Do I say it weird?
No, you say that weird.
I just
weirdly, you say it correctly.
I love them so much. So this was the key for all industry here in Morpeth, but it wasn't the only industry in Morpeth. Because a lot of people were coming to Morpeth to trade, we also saw a lot of different businesses come into Morpeth as well.
Yeah, a lot of actually quite famous businesses. We've got Arnott's Biscuits. The global Arnott's Biscuits company started in Morpeth, just up on Swan Street, the main street, with a a couple of brothers running a biscuit shop.
You can see here is an EV Cizio playing with the Arnott's Bakehouse 1850 plaque. So this is still in place from when the Arnott's Bakery opened here in 1850, making the biscuits we know and love today, such as Tim Tams.
Tim Tams.
It's now the Morpeth sourdough. You can see it's kept the original building intact, as well as this plaque to commemorate the original building that was here. And kids love it.
Also, one of the earliest chemists was run by, I can't remember his first name, let's say Mr. Sol, from Sol Pattinson Chemists, which again has become a nationwide brand, started here in Morpeth. So because of the importance of a transport hub, all secondary industries that supported a large population were also here. From, well, there was a jail, there was 18 pubs in Morpeth, now there's 2. And as well as every other business you could think of that would need to support a large population.
In 1865, Morpeth hit its peak population at 1,403 people.
Exactly.
As we're going to learn in a moment, this came to a pretty sharp decline from 1940 onwards.
Yeah, pretty much from 1865 to 1965, you have almost complete population decline down to about 500 people, and then starts to go back up, and we're almost back to where we were.
All right, let's go learn about the second phase of Morpeth, and that is urban decay. The year is 1940. After all of the urban growth that we just talked about, suddenly a few things happened that were not so good for Morpeth.
Yeah, so as we said before, we've got 3 main phases. This is the second of the 3 phases, the decline phase between 1940 and 1980.
So there were 2 main things that started this phase that ultimately led to the decline in the people living in Morpeth, but also the businesses operating in Morpeth.
The first was that rail connected Newcastle and Sydney for the first time that happened in 1889, but since then, from 1889 to 1940, more and more train lines and train transport was taking goods from this area down to Sydney, meaning river transport was less important.
So farmers who lived in regional New South Wales, instead of having to use the bullock trains that we talked about earlier, my absolute favourite little cow reindeers, all of a sudden they could put their goods onto a train, send it straight to Newcastle or straight to Sydney. It was so much faster, wasn't it, baby girl? Who is that?
I don't know. He just turned up.
Showed up.
Yeah. So this area here, we're actually standing on the old train line that would have transported goods and people. This is actually a passenger line to and from Morpeth. This line right here that we're seeing in the background here connected Morpeth and Maitland, but it was actually closed in 1953, and that was one of the last sort of nails in the coffin for Morpeth at the time as a regional centre, and it became very sort of a disused place after that.
This railway became deserted, the tracks got taken out. It's now just a grassy mound, really.
Yep, exactly.
Not much going on.
Yep.
The second reason that we started to see decay here in Morpeth also has to do with transportation, but it's got more to do with our river transportation, and that had to do with the siltation of the river.
So besides the railway line, the siltation of Hunter River was the other big factor in Morpeth's decline.
As you can see along the river here, we do have a lot of trees, but when people started to use Morpeth and agriculture moved into the area, a lot of these trees were removed. As we know in geography, trees are really important for holding our banks together.
Wait, trees are important?
Trees are in so many reasons.
Important geography lesson, trees are important.
What happened though when they started to remove those trees, the silt and sediment that made up our floodplains, which we can see just down here, wasn't being held together by roots and instead ended up in the Hunter River. What impact did that have, Ciz?
Well, that made the river a lot more shallow, and as I said, this was the deepest point you could get a paddle steamer, and all of a sudden to maintain that depth you had to start dredging that part of the river, which was very costly and time consuming.
So it was becoming very difficult to move materials out of here because of the time it was taking to dredge the river constantly. And around the same time, as we mentioned, trains started to pop up. They became a much more economically viable option.
So paddle steamers basically got out technology by rail, and it became more and more expensive to do it in the old way.
What you can see here is a remnant of the old Queen's Wharf that was opened in 1832. Since this time though, the Queen's Wharf has been renewed and people still use it today for tourism and recreation. This is the new lovely Queen's Wharf. Okay, we're up here just off the main street now at the Morpeth Bridge to talk about the third phase of Morpeth, which is urban renewal.
Okay, so the urban renewal phase started in 1980, and it really started because of one guy. A guy named Trevor Richards bought the old Campbell store, which used to be basically the Coles or the Woolworths of the day back in the 1800s. The building had been left abandoned for about 60 years. He saw an opportunity to start a little arts and crafts shop, maybe bring some tourists to the area, and turns out it was very successful.
Now about 60% of all the shops on Swan Street are dedicated to tourism. So it shows that Trevor Richards had quite a good idea. He was quite the entrepreneur and saw the potential of Morpeth and really helped to start it becoming what it is today. One of the reasons that Morpeth is the way it is today is because they've gone to great lengths to protect the heritage value of this area.
So there's a bunch of rules for building new buildings or renovating old buildings in the whole suburb of Morpeth. Basically, if you're going to build something new, it still has to look like it was built in the mid-1800s.
So behind us we can see the Morpeth Bridge, and what's happening right now is a great example of what happens a lot here in Morpeth, which is they're constantly having to do maintenance work on this bridge. They only use the materials that were originally used on the bridge, and they try and keep it looking exactly like it looked in the 1800s. But this means that you have to do maintenance on it a lot more often than you would any other type of bridge.
Basically maintenance is always ongoing on Morpeth Bridge. It would have been far cheaper, ironically, to knock it down and build a wider, bigger, newer, sturdier, more modern looking bridge. But the whole point of everything that goes on here is the heritage value is really what's bringing people to the town. Therefore, that heritage value needs to be protected.
What we're going to show you in a moment is the main street, which is Swan Street, and it's dominated by small cafes and small independent stores catering to tourists. You get entire busloads of people coming up from Sydney for these antique stores, cafes,
dress shops, chocolate shop.
Really great culture of place here, all about the heritage of the streetscape here in Morpeth. So we'll show you that in a moment. We'll also show you the Campbell store where it all started. And we're also going to show you the big wide roads that allowed for our bullock trains to come into Morpeth. And we still see the sandstone sidewalks and gutters
footpaths
that dominated in the 1800s, because we did have a sandstone quarry down near the wharf as well.
All right, let's go have a look.
Here we have Swan Street. We have one of the 18 pubs that still exist today. There's only 2 now, but you can see it's got the original design that it had in the 1800s. As we scan along, we've got bakery, we've got a crepe shop, we've got little dress stores and antique stores as well.
So just on Swan Street here again, just got a bit of a juxtaposition, it's a good word, of the old and the new. We've got old cast iron gate from the early mid to 1800s. The building itself obviously is very, very, very old, at least mid 1800s again, old corrugated iron, and new broadband box attached to it.
What we have here, besides a Cizio walking down Swan Street, is a lovely old post. And then what we've got here is some sandstone gutters that we were talking about earlier. These are all still in place from when they were first built. They can cause a bit of a trip hazard, especially with some of our older citizens coming up to do antiquing. Can be a bit of a problem. Our sidewalks aren't always the most appropriate here, but it is important for our culture of place.
So here we have an example of the renewal phase of Morpeth. We've got the old Commercial Bank of Sydney building, which was the main bank in Morpeth back in the 1800s, now being used as a real estate agent, but you can see it still looks exactly as it did in 1800.
Thanks for joining us here in Morpeth. We hope this video has helped you to understand how urban growth, urban decay and urban renewal happened, why they happened, and how it's changed the morphology and culture of place here in Morpeth.
You really can't get a better case study of an urban dynamic operating in a small country town or suburb. So there's a lot more to Morpeth than we've been able to cover today, isn't there? Yep, good. But well worth researching more because it's a perfect case study for the dot point.
Also well worth a visit. Before we end today, we'd like to thank a few people. We'd like to thank our new creative director, Evie, our new film manager, Amelia, and our set design manager, and who's been with us today, helping us put this video together. Thanks guys, we'll see you next week on Geography Explained Online. So there's not a great... Oh, it's a